this class, we are going to talk about all the different options you have in down dog, Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog. Now, down dog in a practice is considered a resting pose. It does take some strength and endurance for it to eventually feel like one. If you feel like you have tight hamstrings or tight calves, it is hard to get the legs straight. So the great thing about down dog is that it's not defined by whether your legs are straight or not. It's defined by your feet and hands being on the floor and your buns being somewhere. So let's go through 3 different shoulder positions that you can have. And I want to start by just staying in a seated position. Now, just go ahead and bring your arms up overhead with me and feel just kind of start to experiment with your range of motion without pushing the ribs forward. Just bring the arms up overhead and see what is your range of motion. It might be here, it might be here, it might be way back here. It's going to depend on how your shoulders are built. It's going to depend on the head of your humerus, how it sits in your shoulder socket, what your shoulder blades look like. The clavicle and the shoulder blade is one bone. And so it just depends on how you're built. There's no one way to do down dog, just like there's no one way to do any pose at all. So I like to work with people in this pose so that they understand that maybe the one cue they've ever heard in down dog isn't necessarily going to work for them. So if you feel, just go ahead and in this position, take the shoulders down and back, and then kind of also play with that range of motion, just to see. And then bring the shoulders way up around the ears, and then kind of play around with your range of motion here. You might find that you have a little more freedom with the shoulders elevated, reaching up, and you can take that hand back further. Now, there is a myth in yoga, if you've heard that you need to take the shoulders down and back or up and away from the ears and externally rotate your upper arm in down dog in order to not be injured or create a shoulder impingement, then just let that go, because that's not really true. It might create a shoulder impingement for somebody that doesn't have the right range of motion for a shape such as this, but that doesn't mean that everybody's built that one way. So we're going to play around with these 3 different shoulder positions in a down dog, just so that you find the one that's right for you. That's what's important. There's 1,000 ways to do down dog. We're just going to focus on 3 for the shoulders and 3 for the legs. That sounds good. When you are in down dog, if you've done the perfect lever length class, go ahead and come into child's pose. And you'll notice in child's pose, your shoulders should be up and around the ears. Lots of length here. And then lift the hips, tuck the toes. This is your perfect starting point for a down dog. Now, if you have really tight hamstrings, you can bend the knees a little bit. You might feel a lot of tension in the calves or the Achilles tendon there. So just bend the knees, not a big deal. And you can also take the feet wider and turn the toes out. Now this releases a lot of pressure in the low back, and this is like a great way to do down dog. There's no one way to do any pose. I find this is really helpful for a lot of people that are new to yoga that might have tight low back, tight hips, or just haven't made shapes like this. It doesn't mean that you're tight or that something's wrong with you. It just means that you haven't done this before. So that's cool. So if you're in down dog and the feet are wide, I feel like you can start to get a little more space there in the low back. And you might find that you can straighten your legs this way, because now you're not depending on the hamstrings and the calves. You've got external rotation. That might give you a little more range of motion here. Those would be my 2 favorite options. So of the three, we have straight legs, and then we have bent knees, heels lifted, and then toes out. Now, if you were in a down dog and your heels are on the floor and everything's great, I'm going to ask you to take your heels apart just enough so that they are out of view. This gives you a little tiny bit of internal rotation that carries through your practice in a lot of ways. All right, so you have this position, or feet wider, doesn't matter how wide, this position. So those are your three options. Now let's look at the shoulders. If you have shoulders down and back and external rotation of the arms, that would look like this. You can also straighten out the arms and start to push your hips back. Let the shoulders move up and around the ears. If you're built this way, this is going to be a comfortable, viable, safe, very safe option for you. This is how I do it. This is how I prefer it, in fact. And just letting the shoulders move up and around the ears. That gives you lots of space, lots of range of motion. For some people, I'm going to walk my hands out a little bit here, that have a bigger range of motion. You feel like you want to come into like a deeper shoulder position here. You can sink the shoulders, sink the chest a little bit. If you're built this way, it's perfectly safe. If you've ever practiced with Dharma Mitra, this is how you would do down dog in his class. So you can also do it that way in mine. All right, so we've covered those three positions. You have straight legs, heels out a little bit, bent knees, heels up a little bit, toes out, heels in, and feet wider. Now, any of these modifications that we make are not forever. They're just for right now. You're learning shapes, you're learning body awareness, you are learning where your body parts are when you're not looking at them. And so it's important that you start with what you have right now rather than pushing towards something, some ideal of a pose that you might not be able to achieve right now. And then that only leads to one thing, that leads to you thinking, I can't do yoga, I'm not good at this. So we find out what you can do right now, and it's brilliant. With our shoulder position, we have down and back, external rotation, uncomfortable for me. Shoulders up a little bit of elevation, feels nice, gives me range of motion. Sinking the chest a little bit if you feel like your shoulders can handle that. All right, so you've got three options on both ends. Now, the really magical part of down dog is in not worrying about these two things. We are going to add Mula Bandha to this. Now, Mula Bandha is one of the main sacred lifts or energy locks in the body. And this is really the way I describe it to people that are new to it, is like if you had to stop peeing right now. If you've ever done Kegel exercises, then they can sometimes lead to more tension in the pelvic floor. With Mula Bandha or stopping peeing, it's a kind of a vertical energetic lift. And that's what we want to carry with us through our down dog, that will really define what the rest of the body is going to look like. So instead of worrying about the shoulders and the legs, let's focus on these two other things. We're going to lift the pelvic floor or stop peeing and reach through the sit bones like you want to touch the wall behind you. So sometimes you'll hear a cue, take your sit bones up toward the ceiling. It's impossible to do that because that pushes you into back bend, and then you're being told to take the shoulders up and away from the ears. We're just not built like that. It doesn't work. So we're going to focus on pushing the hips or the buns toward the wall behind you and lifting the pelvic floor. So we get into those two energies, that upward current of liberation that pulls that energy up, lifting the pelvic floor, stop peeing, and reaching through the sit bones. So we've got these two things. They're going to really define what your pose can look like. And once you get better at Mula Bandha and reaching through body parts, then the shape is going to change over time. Yoga isn't something you learn overnight. Down dog can be a 20-year pose. Let's do it. So I'm going to come into down dog from my perfect lever length in child's pose, tuck in the toes a lot. And I'm going to actually adjust a little bit here. So if I'm just kind of hanging out in down dog, this is what it's going to look like. If I lift the pelvic floor, mula bandha or stop peeing, draw that low belly in and up a little bit, and then reach toward the wall behind me through my buns. That action will define what your shoulders look like, and it will define what they can and cannot do. This ability to use the bandhas and other energy locks in your practice and finding some part of the body to reach through or to push down through is what will define what your pose looks like right now. And as you develop those energies and become more connected to those energies, the body will follow along for the ride. So play around with all of these different options. Find what down dog works for you right now. And you can even bring the feet closer in like this. Whatever shape you want to get in right now is your perfect down dog. And then just play around with the 3 options that you have on both ends. And then work on that stopping peeing action of mula bandha and trying to touch the wall behind you with your buns and see how that literally changes the entire thing. All right, have fun.